The cryptocurrency space is absolutely popping off right now. Well, Bitcoin is. Altcoins have not gone too crazy just quite yet. It's still going to take a little bit of time, but today I want to dive back into an old chart that I've shown multiple times on this channel throughout the last couple of years that still holds very much true to this day, that I think will ultimately fascinate quite a lot of people. Now, before I do that, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not done it yet, make sure you go ahead and press that like button. Since we're back in the bullish vibes, you know, the good old time, I can't say that. But since the market's so good again, it would be very much appreciated if we also get those likes up there. Having said that, the chart I was referring to is the cyclical chart of Bitcoin. Now, what this showcases is basically how Bitcoin performs throughout a halving cycle. What is a halving cycle? It's every single time that the Bitcoin mining rewards half. It is an event that happens every 4 years, and it's basically because Bitcoin, there will only ever be 21 million coins, but to make sure you don't get to that number too quickly, there's a couple steps to this actually. For all of you that do not know, Bitcoin works on a proof of work system where the way that new Bitcoin come into existence is basically by computers solving very difficult made problems and they get rewarded for it. That's the simple output. Now, every 4 years, the reward for solving this problem, it halves. And for that reason, it also decreases the speed by which Bitcoin come into existence. So it's like a scarcity effect, right? Now, that manifested is basically the chart I've got in front of me. Now, it's not like Plan B, who is very well known for basically having a stock to flow interesting logarithmic model, or rather regression model, I should say, on a logarithmic scale. That is basically a function of Bitcoin's scarcity, also depicted in a cyclical form. It's slightly different, but slightly the same. Anyway, the point still comes across in the exact same way. What my model here is only showcasing you is basically that Bitcoin goes on a crazy splurge, right? Then goes down about 90% throughout a period of roughly a year. I'll show you. Right here, the downside, you might say, was pretty damn long here, right? All the way back in 2013. But actually, if you start looking at it, I think the dip or the lowest point, or one of the lowest points here, might have actually been roughly a year and a few months in. You know, you're roughly around that park. You could have basically started scooping back up and you would have been golden. So let's just say the worst of times, if you bought anywhere between this time, you would have kind of hated yourself. But after about 420 days, you would have been pretty good to go. Then afterwards, again, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a perfect science. It's just to give you all an indication. It was roughly 2.5 years here of just crazy upside. If we take that earlier dip that I stated, it's roughly 3 years of mostly just upside, with indeed some crazy dips in the midst, but we get it. Then, back in 2017, when we hit ourselves at $20,000 mark, you can see roughly a year of downside and about 85% down. Before quickly, as we see here, over the next roughly 3 years, going up by, in this year, about a 24x, pretty wild, going from the bottom $3,000 to almost $70,000 at the top, something along those lines. And that was, again, when we hit our peak back in October of 2021. What happened afterwards? Well, we fell again by roughly 80% or so over, and again, the next year. That's why I said the start is a bit of an outlier. Still works though, but you have to take this earlier point. If you have to take the further away one, we can say that Bitcoin was still in more of an infancy stage at the time, so we can still count it, I'd say. Regardless, then afterwards, we, based on previous results, again expect roughly 1,100 days or so of good times, and that would end in somewhere around, I'm going to say, oh, camera's stuck. I was going to say that would basically be at roughly a year from now, the end of October of 2025. But now let's start looking at a couple more consistencies. So one thing that becomes quite apparent is that the peak of the market basically lies at about a third or so into the cycle. So again, from the beginning, you can see right here, this white line, it's roughly how much? Let's say about 54 bars in at this point. Here it's roughly been about 70 something bars in. Here it's been how much? Let's see. About 77 bars in. So from the halving back in April or so, let's again think, let's say between 50 to 70 bars in or so. It once more would put us at roughly September or so of 2025 to get to the highest point for Bitcoin if it coincided with these previous movements, which again is what we do expect to happen. But also another couple of interesting pieces, one of which being where Bitcoin decides to overtake the previous high point, indicated by this pretty light gray line or so. You can see that, again, the numbers here are not too perfect. About 30 bars into the cycle, so that means 30 weeks, we broke the all-time high right there. In this case here, let's quickly see, roughly 32 bars or so in, we broke the all-time high. And right now we are in roughly 31 bars or so after the halving. This is usually where we expect the all-time high to be broken. Now, in the strange instance of the 2024 cycle, we actually have already seen Bitcoin breach the all-time high all the way back in March, April. So this time was slightly different. But generally speaking, right, if we look at previous cycles, this is where we expect things to start going parabolic. And so when I made my video earlier today talking about Supercycle, talking about things going crazy, I was not really referring to the fact that $73,000 right now that we touched today, that is only going to go up from here right now. Because even back in the 2017 cycle, you can see that the moment we breached the all-time high, we had a little bit of a correction quickly afterwards, roughly 25% or so in the next few weeks before just absolutely pushing through. All I'm saying is that throughout the last couple of weeks here, we've now basically, for my own mental, right, for my own thought process, we've basically confirmed everything I wanted to see for this super cycle where Bitcoin goes first, takes up a lot of dominance, then altcoins go afterwards, big altcoins first, smaller and smaller ones afterwards. For that similar cycle to what we've seen the last couple of years, well, ever since Bitcoin's inception really, to go and repeat in a similar sort of manner. History doesn't have to repeat itself, but usually it does rhyme in some capacity, and that's also what I'm expecting here. Again, it was different because Bitcoin already broke the all-time high all the way back in March/April. So I'm not expecting it to be the exact same because it can't be. Bitcoin never did that before. However, if we take a look at the past, almost every other part of it is exactly a copy. And again, in my opinion, that's all been solidified by the demand in the Bitcoin ETFs, which just yesterday, again, have seen nearly $500 million worth of inflows. The day before, 400 million. Day before, 188. Day before, 192. Or I should say day before. It's like the previous week. But you get the idea. Before that, about $80 million worth of outflows. But before that, 300 million in, 300 million in, 500 million in, 450 million in, 400 million in, 550 million in, 250 million in, and there, the day before, 81 million out. Just the numbers that we are pulling on these ETFs are so insane. And I personally think that most of the people that are investing through BlackRock, or really anybody here, they're not really planning to sell anytime soon. Otherwise, they would have done it. Think about it. You have to really start thinking about this. Where would they sell now? At 75,000, at the all-time high, the highest point ever for Bitcoin? I think most of the people getting into the ETF are here for at least the whole cycle, if not one more cycle. Most of them, I think, are buying it either to have some different exposure than their traditional portfolio. Some are just speculating, of course, but many of those also will not be the ones selling your top. They'll be the ones selling either too late or, I'm going to say, at least a year after making their investment. So many of the people who are buying in now could perhaps start selling about a year from now. Part of it might also have to do with capital gains tax of longer term holdings. And then specifically, they might do it slightly before the end of the year or just at the start of the year afterwards for tax season. But basically, I don't think many of these guys are buying just to make a quick flip because, again, my own thoughts is the dumbest thing you can do as an investor trying to buy for a really short term is trying to buy the highest price of an asset ever. You might say, it's because they think it's going to go higher. Yeah, but you're buying it at the absolute highest price it's ever been at. Right now it's 72. Oh, I think camera's stuck again. I don't know what's happening here. I want to say you're buying at the absolute high price ever. One of the stupidest things you can do if you're just trying to make a 3% flip or something like that, especially because think about this. Assets become more risky the higher that they go, not less. There's a nice book I can recommend to everybody. It's called The Intelligent Investor. I think Benjamin Graham is the name. And then even in The Silver Lining at the start, there's a really beautiful passage that talks about that. The people often think the more expensive it becomes, the better of a thing it is, right? But that's absolutely wrong when it comes to investing. most of the time, it's the lower something goes, the more attractive it gets because you're trying to buy low and sell high. That's your whole idea. So from that philosophy, anybody buying right now, if their plan is to sell at, for example, $75,000, why would they buy it through an ETF like this? I'm thinking if they're just trying to make a really, really quick flip, that really doesn't make too much sense to me. But let's say they were to sell like 85,000, right? So let's say maybe they want to get 20% gains or so. Just my thinking here. Why would they buy extremely high and try to sell slightly higher? Wouldn't they, logically wait for a really low price then to do something like that if you're speculating on the really short term? I'm thinking most of these are buying it either as a hedge or for at least a cycle because they know this one can run, which is why the numbers are so great even at high prices right now, because they consider them fine for any longer term strategy. Just like how MicroStrategy doesn't really buy dips, they just buy whenever they get money, it seems like. But they right now are an $8.4 billion worth of unrealized profit. And again, if any institutional investor really just copies that playbook, there's a very high probability they'll just end up fine in a really profitable situation. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the matter. Anyway, I personally think the super cycle is here and that we're basically just going to copy a lot of the moves we've seen throughout the last few weeks. Perhaps not. Gonna be honest with you, perhaps not. And we just get flushed out right now. I wake up tomorrow with Bitcoin at $65,000. And people are going to laugh. But hey, I'm going to tell you guys right now, that's fine. Because we know that for the most part, everything we wanted to see has been confirmed. Everything looks as if we're just going to repeat what happened throughout the last couple of, well, I guess ever. Whatever happened for Bitcoin before is going to happen again. Which means that afterwards, most likely we'll see a similar thing happen to all my favorite altcoins. It's still what I'm banking on. Whatever the price does tomorrow is not going to change anything. If you go to $75,000 right now, it doesn't really change anything about thesis because the main underlying thought is we're extremely excited right now. Might take a little bit of time, but I think having time in the markets is better than timing the markets, meaning if you haven't got anything in crypto still, like I said in my previous video, I still think the best way to go about it is get in right now and then just buy your way down lower if you get the chance to, or just buy cyclically every week, every month, every few days, whenever you've got some money, because ultimately, if we let it, like I just said, take a look at MicroStrategy, it's really not that important to time it perfectly. It's just about staying consistent. Many of the people who ask me if they should invest in crypto back in 2021 might still be at a loss right now. You know why? Because they didn't buy dips properly. They bought once and bought at the wrong time and never looked back. You might get unlucky. But if you just keep it up throughout a longer period of time, again, throughout the history of Bitcoin, this has always worked. You would have, because right now we're at the highest price ever, you would have been at a crazy amount of profit. Now, again, some altcoins will not recover to previous all-time highs, but many of the ones that are in the top right now will. They've still got a 10, 20, 30x in them or so over a bull cycle. We're right now prices like back in 2021. Think about this properly. Right now, we are back at prices like we were in 2021 at $20,000. Matter of fact, it didn't even hit $20,000 in 2021. That was in December of 2020 that we last got to those levels. So if you got in the 2021 cycle, realize that we're basically right here, right? In the December of 2020, and the all-time high hit, let's say right around November of 2021 or so. We've got about a year of crazy gains to come, in my own humble opinion. And we're extremely early. Many of you guys will look at it and think, no, we're probably going to dump and we'll fade the opportunity. But most people get in when? Well, most people got in around this ballpark of, let's say, around May or so of 2021. A lot of people got in at roughly August of 2021. And most people that asked me about it, they got in November of 2021. Why? Because that's when the hype was at its all-time high. Right now, though, think about it. Think back. Back in December of 2020, the hype was nearly nowhere, right? Because Bitcoin was at 20,000, the all-time high, sure. But relatively to where the hype was at in November of 2021, this was almost nothing. When was there crazy hype at 20,000? All the way back in 2017. Right now it's 69, 70, 73. There's almost no hype. That hype will come as we get to, let's say, $200,000 this cycle, or let's say $100,000. That's where most people will start to get in as prices start going down lower, or perhaps still upwards a little bit. But the biggest spurt, the biggest growth will most likely already be behind us when most people get in. Because again, we right now have a pretty juicy ride, at least to $100,000, which let's say is about 40% or so worth of gains, where most people will still fade it. and afterwards many people will catch on, sure, but they've lost their benefit from being to be, very, very early. At least those are my thoughts. You might also think that some of these videos have become repetitive, but man, when I look at the comments, I realize these videos are necessary to give my thoughts on the market, get people in the right mindset, because we're really onto something great, and I want many of you guys to hopefully catch on that this is really the time. Don't worry if you're asking yourself which altcoins. I'm also thinking about that daily. You don't want to fade anything, but you don't want to overexpose when the confirmation is not there. We've got a little bit of confirming to do, and we've got a little bit of waiting left to see what the altcoin pivot is going to be. So that's why there's no top altcoin videos, top this, top that. Many people are making them, but honestly, it's either, the camera's a bit stuck, so let me just show it to you like this. If they're making a top altcoin video right now, it's either slightly random, just for some bull cases that will most likely work with not necessarily the highest price return, but just what's most likely going to do well this cycle. So for example, a Solana you can easily pick, a 𝗬𝘂 has been really popular, easy to pick, an 𝗕𝗏𝗪𝗏 has been really popular, easy to pick. Some of these juicy ones or some of the ones that did really well last cycle, just pick them up. Or it's because they just know of some major advancements coming up. So for example, Mantra, they have a couple of cool things coming up. I said the same thing about Metis. I said the same thing about some of these other coins. Since those projects have really cool things coming up, it's easy to mention them, easy to talk about them, perhaps because they've got a lot of money riding on them as well. One of my biggest bags myself, for example, is 𝗕𝗚, and I made a tweet about it like last week or so at 17 cents. Right now, luckily, it's already at 24. Just a few days ago, I said 20 cents, we're going so much higher. And funny enough, it's already up 20% or so since that tweet. So that's kind of nice. But that's also because I just looked into what they've got going on for themselves. And it's so much that it makes sense to me for the price to do well. However, you don't know where it's going to end up at the end of the cycle. You just know, hey, they've got some good things coming up. Could be a juicy move coming up. And again, I'm really, really bullish on the project. Doesn't mean that it's going to be my best contender over an entire bull cycle, if you get my drift. And that's honestly the only coins I really want to talk about on the channel here. What I really think can do extremely well and go on a crazy run. And I try not to talk about meme coins really, because many of you guys don't like it, but it's definitely the most profitable and the biggest hype right now, even though you guys might hate it. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it. Hopefully you guys will press that like button, and hopefully see you guys again in another crypto video very, very soon.